TSA agent destroys black woman's passport moments. Later, she reveals she's the airline CEO. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Step aside, this passport isn't valid. The shout cracked through the security hall like a metal bar hitting concrete. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the rolling suitcases seemed to hesitate for half a heartbeat. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Terminal C, she stood still, a young black woman in a gray hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, her braid falling neatly along her chest. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't even blink. She simply breathed, slow and steady, as the TSA officer in front of her held her passport up like a trophy in an argument he was determined to win. He was older, maybe late 50s, uniform pressed so tight it pulled at the seams when he moved. His face flushed red as he waved the passport in the air, loud enough for the line of passengers behind her to hear every accusation. "What is this? Where did you get it? You think you can just walk through here like everyone else?" A murmur rippled through the queue. People shifted their weight, angled their phones, whispered without shame. Someone, a few spots behind a man in a black shirt, lifted his phone subtly, recording from waist level. A yellow indicator light blinked above the conveyor belt, casting an uneasy glow across the scene as if the entire terminal had stopped to watch this one moment unfold. But she didn't answer him. She didn't defend herself. Her gaze stayed level, calm, anchored like someone who had heard this tone far too many times to be surprised by it anymore. The officer leaned forward, inches from her face, veins tightening across his jaw. "I said step aside. Don't make me repeat myself." She inhaled once, softly. The kind of breath someone takes not to calm down, but to decide. Behind her, passengers shuffled, their irritation beginning to twist into curiosity, then discomfort. The air thickened, slow and heavy. Before she responded, her voice entered the room differently, low, measured, unwavering. But before her words, mine must come first. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. She lifted her eyes toward the officer. No fear, no tremble, just a quiet certainty. He shook the passport again, harder this time, as if rattling it might shake loose an explanation he'd already decided didn't exist. "You're holding up real travelers, people who actually belong here." His words hit with the force of something he didn't bother softening, something practiced. Another officer from the far lane looked over, eyebrows raised not out of concern, but curiosity, like watching a fire start on someone else's lawn. A few passengers exchanged glances, discomfort tightening their mouths. A woman in a navy coat whispered, "Why is he shouting like that? She hasn't done anything." But the officer didn't hear the room. Or maybe he did and liked it. He stepped closer again. "Answer me, where did you get this passport?" Still, she didn't move. Only her fingers shifted just slightly, curling once, then loosening. A gesture that didn't scream anger, but preparation. Preparation for something none of them were ready for. Not the officer, not the passengers, not even the man filming. Because in less than 10 minutes, every person in that security line would learn exactly who she was, and why raising his voice at her was the last mistake he should have made. The passport trembled between the officer's fingers, not because he was unsure, but because he was worked up too loud, too eager, as if proving her wrong somehow proved him right. "Don't look at me like that," he barked. "You heard what I said. Step out of the line." His voice ricocheted off the metal barriers. A few passengers winced, not because of her, but because of him. A toddler nearby clutched her mother's coat. Someone muttered, "Geez, man." Still, she didn't move. A storm raged on his face as he leaned closer. "What part of invalid do you not understand? You think a hoodie makes you invisible? You think I can't tell when something's off?" He flipped the passport open with exaggerated force, pages fluttering like he expected something illegal to fall out. When nothing did, his lips curled in irritation. Behind them, the line wound deeper into the terminal. People edged sideways to get a better view. The man in the black shirt finally lifted his phone fully, camera aimed forward without shame now. He whispered to someone beside him, "This is insane. She's literally just standing there." A woman 2 spaces behind added softly, "There's no way this is protocol." But the officer wasn't listening to the room. He had chosen his target, and he intended to finish what he'd started. He jabbed a finger toward her chest, not touching, but close enough that the intention was unmistakable. "Passengers who raise red flags get pulled, and you're a walking red flag." Her eyes lifted to his hand, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the movement carried weight enough to still the whispers behind her. He snorted, mistaking her silence for surrender. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He turned to the nearest colleague, waving the passport wildly. "Get the scanner, and call for a supervisor. We might have a forged document situation." The colleague, younger, mid-20s, face uncertain, hesitated. His eyes flicked between the officer, the passport, and her calm expression. Something didn't add up, and he felt it. "I already scanned her ticket," he said quietly. "It went through." The older officer whipped around. "I didn't ask what you scanned. Do what I said." A moment, just a moment. But it was enough for everyone in line to feel the shift, that bone-deep instinct that something wrong was happening right in front of them. He held the passport up to the fluorescent lights as if the truth might glow through the pages. "See? This color's off. The laminate looks cheap. And the number, it's a government-issued passport." The younger officer cut in gently. "Those are standard." The older man's face darkened. "Are you questioning me?" "No, sir. I'm just saying." "Then stay in your lane." He snapped the passport shut with a sharp clap that drew more eyes. A traveler with a neck pillow paused mid-step. Someone near the front whispered, "Is he seriously doing this?" She stood silent in the center of it all, unmoving, steady, almost unnervingly composed. The line moved around her, unease rippling outward like tension on a drum. Then the officer took one step too far. He grabbed a plastic secondary screening bin and dropped her passport into it with a clatter, loud enough to echo. "Until we determine who you really are, this stays with me." A few passengers gasped. Someone said under their breath, "You can't just take it." But he could, and he did. He folded his arms triumphantly, convinced he held the upper hand. She finally drew in a full breath, slow, controlled, a breath that said, "You have no idea what you just set in motion." Because in less than 5 minutes, the terminal would learn exactly who they were dealing with and why his authority was nothing compared to hers. The bin sat on the metal table like a verdict, her passport tossed inside as if it were contraband, not a legal document. The officer planted one hand on the edge, leaning in, blocking the lane with his body. "Next," he barked to the line behind her, even though she still stood exactly where she had been, refusing to be erased by motion. But no one moved. Not a single passenger dared step past her. The man filming lowered his phone just enough to whisper, "This isn't right," before lifting it again, now recording openly. A woman with a carry-on hugged the strap over her shoulder, eyes flicking between the officer and the bin. Another traveler shook his head, muttering, "He's way out of line." The officer snapped, "Keep moving!" But his voice, once booming, now hit resistance, the invisible pushback of a crowd waking up. Still, she stood, spine straight, feet grounded, posture steady like she had anchored herself to the floor of the terminal. She didn't raise her gaze yet. She didn't need to. The silence around her had already become its own storm. That was when the younger officer, the one who had scanned her ticket, took a hesitant step forward. His fingers fiddled with the radio clipped to his vest, anxiety tightening his shoulders. "Sir," he said carefully. Her code went green. She passed initial clearance, and her name matches the manifest. The older officer didn't turn around. "We're not having this discussion. I said she's flagged." "She's not flagged," the younger one insisted, voice trembling but firming with each word. "I checked. Twice." A murmur fluttered through the line, passengers leaning closer, witnessing the fracture between the two officers. The older man finally twisted toward him, eyes blazing. "You trying to undermine me? In front of a line of passengers?" The young officer swallowed. "I'm trying to follow procedure." "That is procedure," someone in line whispered sharply. Another voice, a man with a backpack, added, "He's doing his job. Maybe you should too." The older officer shot a glare toward the crowd. "Stay out of this." But they already weren't. Phones were up, dozens now. Passengers exchanged looks that said everything. "We're seeing this. We're not pretending we didn't. And in that tightening circle of attention, a memory flickered through her mind, sharp and unwelcome. Airport. 16 years old. A return flight after visiting her aunt. Pulled aside for random screening 3 times in a row. She remembered how the officer back then had sighed as if she were the inconvenience. How her parents had argued, but the room had swallowed their words. How powerless she felt. That feeling tried to surface now. She didn't allow it. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, not fists, but anchors pulling her firmly back into the present. A present where she was no longer 16. No longer voiceless, no longer small. The older officer pointed aggressively at her again. You can't fly today, not until we get a supervisor to verify this. So unless you want to make this worse, he didn't finish. Because the younger officer stepped closer to her instead, lowering his voice. Ma'am, do you have another form of ID? Not accusatory, not hostile, just human. Before she could answer, the older officer slammed his palm on the table, rattling the plastic bin. Don't talk to her. She doesn't need another ID. She needs to step out of the line. A woman behind them gasped. Aman muttered, Dude, chill. But the officer had already leaned forward, crowding her space. His voice lowered, venom simmering beneath the surface. People like you always think rules don't apply. Not today. That was the moment the young officer's face changed, a flicker of disgust, disbelief, something moral waking up inside him. He looked at her again, really looked, and whispered, I'm sorry this is happening. Those words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than the shouting. For the first time, she lifted her eyes, slow, deliberate, meeting the younger officer's anxious stare. It won't be happening much longer, she said softly. And though her voice was calm, its certainty sent a shiver through the people closest to her. Because something was shifting, something unseen but unmistakable. In the next 3 minutes, everyone there would understand exactly what she meant. The older officer's palm was still pressed against the table, the plastic bin shuddering beneath the force he'd used. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, humming faintly, a thin, nervous tremor across the ceiling that mirrored the tension crawling through the air. She hadn't moved. Not when he slammed the table, not when the phones came up, not when his voice soured into something uglier. But the moment he leaned in again, invading her space, breath hot with misplaced power, the room shifted around her, as if the terminal itself drew a collective breath. You're done here, he growled, teeth clenched. I'm confiscating this until we figure out who you really are. He reached toward the bin. And that was the moment everything snapped. Not loudly, not with screams, but with a ripple, a cold, heavy silence that dropped over the security lane like a curtain. Because just as his fingers brushed the edge of her passport, her hand moved. Not fast, not aggressive, simply firm, steady, intercepting the bin with a single, decisive motion. His eyes widened, not from fear, but from shock that she dared. Passengers held their breath. A man whispered, Oh, boy. Someone farther back whispered. She finally reacted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step forward. She didn't even touch him. She just placed her hand on the bin, claiming the space he had tried to invade. Don't, she said quietly. A single syllable. Soft, even gentle, but it landed like a command. The older officer recoiled as if the word itself had struck him. Excuse me? The younger officer instinctively stepped in, one hand hovering near his radio, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. The crowd knew which they wanted. This had gone too far. She didn't do anything wrong, someone called out. This is harassment, another said more loudly. Just give her the passport back. The officer whipped toward the voices, face flushing deeper. All of you stay out of official security procedures. But the line had grown bold now. A woman in a denim jacket folded her arms. Then maybe act like it's a procedure and not a tantrum. Gasps popped across the line. Someone whispered, She said that out loud? The officer spun back toward her, toward the woman in the hoodie, fury rising like heat from asphalt. You think this crowd is going to protect you? He hissed. Think again. I've dealt with your type before. Those 4 words hit her like a cold blade. Your type. The terminal blurred for a split second, the hum of conveyor belts fading, the footsteps muffled as a memory slammed into her with surgical precision. Atlanta, 23 years old. Red-eye flight. Exhausted from meetings but hopeful. Stopped at customs for behavioral inconsistencies. Held in a stark room with metal chairs. Her ID questioned again and again, while men in suits breezed through without a single glance. She remembered staring at the clock, how each minute felt like an indictment, how she vowed quietly, with the kind of fire that comes from humiliation, that one day she would hold enough power that no one could ever do that to her again. Her jaw tightened. The flashback dissolved, replaced by the present, by the officer still spitting old prejudice into new air. She finally lifted her gaze to meet his full-on. The calm in her eyes wasn't passive anymore. It carried weight. History. Resolve. "You don't know my type," she said softly. He scoffed. "I know exactly what—" "No," she interrupted, still soft, but with a sharpened edge. "You only know your assumptions." Her hand stayed on the bin. His hovered above it, unsure. For the first time since this began, he hesitated. The younger officer noticed. The passengers noticed. Even the terminal seemed to pause. Because something in her tone, something in the steadiness of her stance, told everyone one thing. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up because she had done this before, endured this before, survived this before, and she was done letting people like him repeat the same story. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the story was about to flip entirely, and he'd be on the wrong side of it. The older officer's hesitation lasted less than a second, but in that second, the entire terminal felt suspended, as if the air itself waited to see which direction the moment would break. He chose the worst one. With a sharp, irritated exhale, he reached past her shoulder and took hold of the bin, dragging it toward himself. The plastic scraped loudly against the metal table, the sound jagged enough to slice the room in half. "Enough of this," he snapped. "You don't control this area." "I do." Her fingers slipped from the edge of the bin as he yanked it away, not because she let go out of fear, but because she refused to let the moment descend into a physical struggle he could twist against her. But the officer took her lack of resistance as confirmation of something he already believed. Something wrong. Something ugly. "People who behave like this," he said, voice reeking of vindication, "usually have a reason to hide." Gasps fluttered through the line again. A man whispered, "He's digging his own grave." A woman added, "This is getting dangerous for him." Still, she remained steady, feet planted, shoulders still, gaze fixed not on the bin he'd stolen, but on him. The officer mistook her restraint for weakness. "Security escort incoming," he said into his radio, though no such call had been requested. He wanted escalation, wanted backup, wanted an audience watching him dominate a woman who refused to shrink. But something in his voice awakened a memory sharper than all the rest. A different terminal, a different officer, a different humiliation. She was 19, fresh scholarship, first business conference, blazer borrowed from her mother. Her hands shook when she handed over her documents, but her smile was bright, hopeful. Until the agent looked at her, not at her ID, not at her ticket, but at her. "Step aside," he had barked. "We need to verify your purpose of travel." Purpose. As if a young black woman couldn't possibly travel for business. As if ambition required permission. She remembered being escorted to a corner of the inspection area. Cold chairs, harsher lights, the sting of guilt for something she didn't do. She remembered sitting there for nearly an hour, while other travelers flowed past like she was invisible, or worse, suspicious. She remembered the lump in her throat, the shame burning under her skin, the desperate wish that she were someone, anyone, powerful enough that no one would dare speak to her like that again. That moment had carved itself into her bone. And now, standing in Terminal C, that same cold fire returned not as fear, but as clarity. She lifted her eyes fully to the officer now, and something in her gaze finally made him step back half a foot. Just half, but everyone saw it. The younger officer felt it first. He swallowed hard. "Sir, maybe we should—" "No," the older man snapped, even more defensive now. "She's refusing to cooperate." "She's not refusing anything," someone in line called out. "She hasn't even spoken," another added. "She doesn't need to," the older officer growled. "Her behavior tells me everything. Her behavior, her silence, her skin, her existence, all of it misread, mishandled, misjudged." But she was done letting people rewrite her. Her hand moved slowly, not toward the bin, not toward him, but toward the pocket of her hoodie. Her fingers wrapped around her phone with a stillness so controlled it felt ceremonial. The younger officer stiffened, sensing something shifting. Passengers leaned in. Even the humming luggage belt seemed to quiet. She raised the phone to her chest, screen untouched, voice low but absolute. "Nia, Begin phase 1. Those closest heard it. Those a few steps away only saw her lips move, but the ones recording caught everything. And though the older officer had no idea who Nia was, or what phase 1 meant, the crowd could feel it. The tide turning, the ground shifting, the story breaking open. In less than 3 minutes, the bin he'd stolen would be the least of his problems, because the woman in the gray hoodie was no longer the one being cornered. She was the one taking control. The phone had barely touched her palm before a soft click sounded in her ear, a quiet confirmation tone that shouldn't have been audible in a terminal this loud. But to her, it cut through the chaos like a clean blade. On the other end, Nia's voice emerged instantly. Calm, precise, already 2 steps ahead. Phase 1 activated. Terminal C monitoring is live. Audio sync engaged. Do you need me to escalate? She didn't answer yet. Not because she hesitated, but because she wanted the room to feel the shift. The older officer raised an eyebrow, confused, almost amused. Who are you talking to? You think calling someone is going to fix this? People in the line exchanged glances. The younger officer stiffened, sensing movement in the unseen machinery behind her. A man filming whispered, "Wait, what's happening?" Another responded, "She's not panicking, this is planned." She kept her phone angled toward her chest, not hiding the call, but not flaunting it either. Her voice stayed low, steady, the calmest sound in a room full of tension. "Nia, confirm internal visibility." "Confirmed," the assistant replied instantly. "Your position is logged. Camera feeds have been marked for audit. Perimeter mics are active. Do you want supervisor dispatch?" She let a long, quiet breath fall into the microphone, a signal Nia knew well. The older officer misread it entirely. "What's that supposed to be? A threat? Are you recording me?" He jabbed a finger toward her phone. "Phones stay down in security lanes." She finally met his eyes. "For you," she said softly, "they should stay up." A ripple moved across the crowd, small but unmistakable. The officer's face reddened again. "What is that supposed to mean?" Before she could respond, Nia's voice sounded once more through the tiny speaker. "Supervisor alert sent. Compliance team 2 minutes out. Do you want phase 2 authorization?" The older officer barked a laugh. "What is this? Some kind of game? You don't get to request supervisors." He didn't notice the younger officer's face tightening. Didn't notice the 2 TSA agents at the far end exchanging uneasy looks. Didn't notice the way the phones in the line were angled higher now, catching every detail. He only noticed her, the one person who refused to fold under his voice. She lowered her phone slightly, tilting it away from her ear as she addressed Nia with a sense of quiet inevitability. "Not yet. Keep the channel open." "Copy," Nia replied. "Standing by," the officer scoffed. "You're out of your depth. I've been doing this job longer than you've been alive." She didn't disagree. She didn't correct him. She simply lifted her gaze with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who has nothing to prove, only something to reveal. Meanwhile, the young officer stepped forward, voice shaking with a moral courage he had been wrestling with for minutes. "Sir, I really think we should stop. Her ticket is valid. Her ID matches. She hasn't resisted once. Protocol doesn't call for—" "Protocol?" the older officer snapped. "I'm protocol today, not her, not you." He exhaled in a long, shaky breath, the sound of a man rapidly losing the authority he believed was unshakable. She watched him quietly, then lifted the phone back to her ear. "Nia." "Yes?" "Mark that sentence for the record." "Done." The officer threw up his hands, incredulous. "Oh, give me a break. You aren't important enough for a record. You're just—" He stopped, not because he chose to, but because 2 uniformed supervisors appeared at the far end of the lane, walking with purpose, radio lights blinking red. The younger officer saw them first. His breath caught. She wasn't kidding," he whispered. The crowd felt the shift. Phones lifted higher. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. For the first time, the older officer's confidence faltered. "Why are they coming here?" he muttered. She answered him without raising her voice. "Because you're not the only one with authority in this terminal." And as the supervisors approached, posture stiff, expressions controlled the room understood. The power was no longer his. It had moved, quietly, precisely, and unmistakably, to her. The supervisors approached in a straight line, their steps clipped and deliberate, cutting through the security lane like a knife through fabric. The crowd parted without being asked. Phones tilted upward, tracking every inch of their movement. Even the loudspeaker overhead seemed to quiet, as if the terminal itself leaned in. The older officer straightened his posture. Suddenly, he was all protocol again, chin raised, badge pushed forward, the swagger of a man expecting backup. "Finally," he muttered. "About time somebody with rank got over here." He stepped toward them, speaking before they had even come to a full stop. "This passenger is refusing to comply. Suspicious ID, suspicious behavior, escalating situation." The supervisors didn't look at him. Not yet. Their eyes were on her, on the woman standing silently at the center of the storm, phone still in her hand, posture unbroken. Something in the way she held herself made both supervisors pause, not out of intimidation, but recognition. The faint flicker of understanding passed between them like a shared memory. They knew her posture. They knew that calm. They knew that type of authority. And it wasn't the officers. The older man noticed their hesitation. Confusion crept across his features. She wasn't kidding," he whispered. The crowd felt the shift. Phones lifted higher. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. For the first time, the older officer's confidence faltered. "Why are they coming here?" he muttered. She answered him without raising her voice. "Because you're not the only one with authority in this terminal." And as the supervisors approached, posture stiff, expressions controlled the room understood. The power was no longer his. It had moved. The officer snapped over his shoulder. "Stay out of it." The supervisor frowned. She turned to the younger officer. "Did she resist any procedure?" He looked at her, then at the woman in the hoodie, then down at the floor. His voice came out quiet but clear. "No. She cooperated with everything. I scanned her boarding pass. It cleared. The ID matched." The older officer whipped toward him. "You need to watch your tone." But the supervisor lifted a hand. A simple gesture, but it stopped every word in his throat. "Sir," she said sharply, "why was her passport placed in a confiscation bin?" A tremor of embarrassment slipped across his posture. Because she acted suspicious." "What suspicious behavior?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Passengers stared. A few exchanged muffled laughs of disbelief. Someone whispered, "He's cooked." Her voice finally entered the silence, soft, level, cutting through the tension like a quiet scalpel. "My behavior has been fully compliant." Every eye swung to her. A low hum rolled through the hall, the sound of a crowd realizing that despite all the noise, she hadn't lost a single ounce of control. The supervisor's gaze sharpened. "Is that correct?" she asked the younger officer. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Completely." Now the supervisor finally turned her full attention to her. "Do you have someone we can contact?" she asked. "A representative? A liaison?" The older officer scoffed. "What is that supposed to mean? She's nobody. She caused this entire—" He didn't finish, because in one smooth, precise motion, she held up her phone not to the officer, but to the supervisor. On the screen, a name glowed at the top of the call. Nia Thompson, Executive Operations Chief, Silver Wing Airlines. The crowd gasped. The younger officer froze. Even the supervisor's eyes widened a fraction barely noticeable, but enough. The older officer blinked, confused. "Silverwing? Why is corporate operations on your phone?" She lowered the device, her expression unchanged. "You asked for someone to contact," she said quietly. "She's already listening." The supervisor exhaled slowly, the kind of breath people take when they realize the ground under them has shifted and they must adjust or fall. The older officer sputtered, This doesn't mean anything. Anybody could—" But his voice trailed off when Nia's voice, crisp, professional, undeniable, broke through the speaker. "Supervisor Lane, this is an urgent advisory. You are interacting with a high-level executive of our organization. Proceed with caution." Dead silent. For the first time, the crowd didn't react with gasps or whispers. It reacted with stillness. A stillness that said, "We knew something was off. And now it's confirmed." The older officer swallowed hard. She looked at him not with anger, but with something far more devastating. "Recognition. You assumed who I was," she murmured. "Now you're about to learn who I actually am." And the reveal wasn't even complete yet. For a moment, the entire terminal stood frozen. The red lights on the supervisor's radios blinked in a slow, synchronized pulse, almost like the room was holding its breath with them. The older officer stared at her phone as if it were a weapon pointed at his career. High level what?" he stammered, the arrogance bleeding out of him in thin, shaky threads. The supervisor didn't answer. She was listening, actually listening to the voice still speaking from the device in the woman's hand. Nia's tone was calm, measured, but threaded with something unmistakable. Authority. Supervisor Lane, Nia continued, her voice projecting cleanly through the tiny speaker. All actions taken against this passenger are being recorded and reviewed by headquarters. Compliance breach markers are already in place. The supervisor swallowed, hard, and all at once, her posture shifted, shoulders straightening, hands clasping in front of her, the stance of someone who realized they weren't the highest-ranking person in the room. But the older officer didn't understand yet. He stepped forward, pointing at the phone like someone pointing at smoke and calling it fire. Anyone can fake a call. Anyone can. The supervisor cut him off sharply. That's a direct line to corporate operations. How do you know? He snapped. She turned the screen toward him, on it, glowing in unmistakable text. Silverwing Airlines internal secure call, encrypted. The man filming let out a low "holy" before catching himself. A woman near the conveyor belt covered her mouth. The younger officer stepped back a full pace, as though space itself might protect him from what was coming. The older officer's voice cracked. That doesn't prove who she is, it just proves she knows someone, he insisted, desperate now. She's still a security risk. No, the supervisor said. You are. He blinked. Me? Her documents were valid. Her scans were cleared, and you escalated without justification. Her tone sharpened, slicing the room cleanly. You went off protocol. Oh. The older officer opened his mouth, but the younger officer stepped in not boldly, but bravely. He's been hostile since the start, the young man said quietly. She didn't do anything wrong. That was it. That was the moment the crowd flipped completely. Voices rose not chaotic, but unified. She followed every rule. He grabbed her passport. He lied about procedure. Give her stuff back. Man, just apologize already. Dozens of phones angled at the older officer, capturing his paling face from every possible angle. He sputtered, waving his arms in a final, unraveling attempt at authority. All of you don't understand. I thought, that's the problem, she said softly. And the softness hit harder than shouting ever could. Supervisor Lane stepped closer. Return her passport. The officer froze. I can't. It's in the bin. It means nothing, the supervisor snapped. Give it back now. His hand trembled as he lifted the bin, retrieving the passport he'd tossed like trash minutes earlier. The shame on his face glowed brighter under the fluorescent lights. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. Not yet. The supervisor looked at her, then at the phone still in her palm. Ma'am, would you like us to finalize formal corrective action? A whoosh fell. Passengers leaned forward. The older officer looked like a man who'd stepped off a ledge and only now realized there was nothing underneath. She let the silence stretch long enough for him to feel every pair of watching eyes, every camera recording, every choice he'd made tightening around him like a closing fist. Then she raised the phone. Nia. Yes. Mark this moment. Logged, Nia replied. Ready for phase 3 whenever you authorize. The older officer's knees seemed to soften. What's phase 3? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. She finally took the passport from his hand, not snatching it, not shaking, simply reclaiming what was hers. Her answer was simple, devastating, and absolute accountability. And the collapse wasn't symbolic anymore. It was happening in real time. The terminal seemed to exhale as she took back her passport, not triumphantly, not angrily, but with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any outburst could. Around her, the crowd settled into a stunned silence. Phones remained raised, but no one spoke, as if sound itself might break the gravity of the moment. The older officer stood rigid, his shoulders hunched inward, his mouth slightly open, the look of a man who had just realized he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. The younger officer hovered behind him, guilt and relief at war across his face. Supervisor Lane stepped closer. Ma'am, she began carefully, if you'd like to file a formal complaint, we can... But she lifted a hand, gently cutting the supervisor off. There was no anger in the gesture, just clarity. Not yet, she said softly. Her voice settled over the lane like warm smoke, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. She slid the passport into her hoodie pocket, smoothing the fabric once, as if closing a chapter with a physical gesture. Give it back now. His hand trembled as he lifted the bin, retrieving the passport he'd tossed like trash minutes earlier. The shame on his face glowed brighter under the fluorescent lights. He held it out to her. She didn't take it. Not yet. The supervisor looked at her, then at the phone still in her palm. Ma'am, would you like us to finalize formal corrective action? A whoosh fell. Passengers leaned forward. Then she lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of every officer in front of her. You assumed I was a problem, she said quietly. But I was only traveling. The older officer flinched. She continued, each word measured, landing with the weight of truth, not fury. You raised your voice. You broke protocol. You escalated without cause. A breath passed. And you expected me to shrink. The crowd murmured, not loud, just present, like a tide returning. I made a mistake. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. She didn't offer him the kind of forgiveness he hadn't earned. She just nodded once. Now you understand the cost of assumptions. Behind her, the phones slowly lowered, not because people lost interest, but because they understood the moment was moving from spectacle into lesson. She took one step forward. The officers instinctively parted. The younger officer looked at her with a mixture of apology and awe. She turned slightly so the passengers behind her could hear. Her posture stayed still, but her presence expanded, filling the terminal with something larger than the conflict itself. I didn't raise my voice, she said. I didn't threaten you. I didn't disrespect you. Her eyes shifted back to the older officer. I simply didn't disappear. A wave passed through the crowd, a soft chorus of agreement, the kind that doesn't need applause to be powerful. The officer swallowed. I can walk. And she did. Slow, calm, unshaken. Passengers stepped aside, not out of fear, out of respect. A mother touched her daughter's shoulder and whispered, "Watch her. This is how you stand your ground." At the end of the lane, she paused just long enough to look back, not at the officer, but at the crowd. Her final words were soft, but they carried farther than anything shouted in that room. Dignity isn't loud, but it's powerful. And as she disappeared into the flow of travelers beyond the scanners, the truth settled over everyone like a closing scene. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard.